They gave my sister $400,000. They gave me a truck. She laughed. She said, "Enjoy your worthless pile of junk." Nobody in that room knew the truck was worth more than every dollar she was about to spend. They took the house. They took the farm on paper. They took the toast and the hugs. Everyone said Whitney finally got what she deserved. I got two keys, a warm leather fob, a lawyer who told me to take my time getting under it. I didn't understand him yet. I would. 3 weeks later, my sister's lawyer went pale. He read a clause out loud. The 400,000 she'd already spent turned into a debt with her name on it. But before any of that, there was a barn, a green Ford, and a weld too fresh for the rust around it. But this story really starts at a will reading, a lawyer's office on the Greenfield Square, 6 weeks after my grandfather died. My name is Dana Hollis. I was 28. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I sat in a hard chair in Raymond Settle's office. The courthouse clock showed through the window. The radiator ticked the same tick it always did. $400,000, the notary read. Split among the family. To Whitney, a third. To the aunts and cousins, the rest. And to me, Dana, the granddaughter who'd lived with him since I was 9. I'd changed his oil. I'd changed his furnace filter. I'd changed his bed sheets near the end. Earl left me one thing: the green Ford in the back stall of the barn. The truck? Whitney said again, in case anyone had missed her gift for kindness. All those years out there in the grease, and you get the truck. There's a God after all. The aunts smiled into their laps. My cousin Brett studied his phone. Nobody told her to stop. That's the part you learn to read fast. Not the cruelty itself, the silence around it, the whole room agreeing without a word. Dana gets the truck. Dana always got the parts nobody else wanted. I had a thing I say instead of a speech. 3 words shaped like 4. I said them down low where my voice lives. I don't get loud. I get it in writing. Mr. Settle slid the key ring across the desk. 2 keys and a worn leather fob, gone black with handling. He was specific about that, Dana, he said. Careful. The way a man's voice gets when he knows more than the room. Earl was specific about the truck going to you. Specific, Whitney repeated. She rolled the word around like it tasted good. He was 83 and he loved his junk. Dana, honey, you can probably get 400 for it at the scrapyard, if the bed's not rusted through. She zipped her bag. Even the bag was expensive, in that thin, logo-heavy way. The rest of us will figure out the real money. The real money. She said it like it was already sitting in her purse. I'd learn later how badly she needed it to be real. That her Indianapolis design studio was a glass storefront and an empty calendar. That she'd already borrowed against a check that hadn't cleared. I didn't know the size of her fear yet. I only knew the shape of mine, sitting there in my work coat, among people in good shoes, holding 2 keys to a truck they'd just appraised at 0. I closed my hand around the fob. It was warm, the way leather holds the last hand that held it. Grandpa's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Settle," I said, and I stood. Dana. He half rose too. For a second I thought he'd say the thing his eyes were saying. Instead, he held my look a beat too long. "Drive it home. Take your time getting under it." Funny thing to say. I filed it. The way I file an engine sound that isn't alarming yet. Just wrong enough to remember. Whitney was already in the hall. Already on the phone. No, it clears probate and then yeah, a third. 133,000, give or take. I earned every penny of it just putting up with this family. If you've ever watched somebody count money in front of the person they just took it from, you know something. There's no point arguing. The smile isn't a mistake. The smile is the whole strategy. I walked past her, down the courthouse steps, into the cold. I didn't say a word. The barn out on Picket Road sat just like it always had. Gray boards, a tin roof, gravel crunching the same as every day of my growing up. Earl took me in when I was 9, after my parents' car went off Route 9, an ice storm I still won't drive through. He never once made it sound like charity. He just set another plate. He taught me to listen to a diesel the way some men teach a kid to pray. The green Ford sat in the back stall under a tarp. It had lived there for years. I pulled the canvas off. Dust came up gold in the one window's light. An F250, older than me. The green gone chalky, rust blooming brown around the wheel arches. To anybody at that reading, it was $400 of scrap and a punchline. To me, it was the truck my grandfather crawled under about 400 times. That's not a figure of speech. Earl was forever on his back beneath that Ford. Checking the frame, he'd call up, boots sticking out, a trouble light hooked over the leaf spring. I'd be 16, telling him the frame had been fine for a decade. Come inside, supper's cold, and he'd slide out grinning, grease in the creases of his face. He'd say the same thing every time. The good stuff rides underneath, Dana. You only ever look at what's shiny. That's how folks get fooled. I thought it was an old man saying about engines. I got in. The cab smelled like him, pipe tobacco and lava soap, the dust of a thing that sits. The seat held the dent of his shape. I turned the key. She didn't catch the first time, or the second. On the third she rolled over, coughed, then idled rough and steady. That diesel knock settling into a rhythm I could have picked out of 100 engines blind. I sat with both hands on the wheel. I let her warm up. I did not cry. I want that on the record. Not because it didn't hurt, because some hurts you don't hand to anybody, least of all an empty barn. I drove her the long way home, past fields gone stubble brown. The whole time some part of my brain did what it always does, the thing the family looked down on, the thing that paid my rent, reading the machine. The steering was tight, the brakes pulled a hair left, and under all of it, under the road noise and the knock, something rode different than it should. A weight. A little extra ballast low in the frame. My body felt it before my mind named it. I filed that too. My shop sits behind the house Earl left to, well, I'd find out soon enough who he'd left the house to. It wasn't who any of them assumed. 2 bays, a lift, a pegboard I keep clean enough that customers tease me about it. I backed the Ford into the second bay. The lift was busy with a customer's dually. I told myself I'd put her up tomorrow, go through her properly. A free truck is still a truck, might as well make her run right. But I couldn't leave her alone. You know how it is when something nags. I clicked on the trouble light. I walked her slow, the way I walk every machine that comes to me, hand flat on the metal, listening with my palm, quarter panels, rockers, the bed, rust, honest rust, decades of Indiana winters written all over her in brown. And then my thumb found something that didn't belong. Down low, on the frame rail behind the cab, under a skin of grime and surface rust, there was a seam. A weld. I do this for a living. I can run my thumb down a bead and tell you who laid it, whether they were tired, whether they meant it. A good weld stacks up like a roll of dimes, even and proud. A bad one looks like bird mess. This one was good. This one was beautiful, honestly. Left-handed, stacked tight, the kind of patient work a man does when nobody's watching, when he's got all the time in the world, and a reason, and it was too fresh. I stood there a long moment, my thumb on that seam, the trouble light swinging a slow arc across the ceiling. Fresh weld under 40 years of rust means somebody worked on this frame recently. I only knew one somebody who ever crawled under this truck. My phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Brett, forwarded from the family group chat I mostly muted. Whitney's post, a photo of a glossy real estate listing, a downtown loft, the caption already up, manifesting the next chapter. Below it, three aunts with heart emojis. My mother's sister writing she's finally getting what she's owed after everything she's sacrificed for this family. Whitney hadn't sacrificed a single thing for this family in her life. She'd left for Indianapolis at 22. She came back twice a year. Thanksgiving, whenever Earl's health made the local news, whenever a hospital bill needed splitting three ways. She always made sure everyone remembered she'd chipped in $40. I didn't reply. I looked back at the weld. The good stuff rides underneath, I said out loud. To an empty shop, to a dead man's truck. You only ever look at what's shiny. I thought about calling Mr. Settle right then. Instead, I did what Earl taught me to do with any machine that surprises you. I stepped back. I wrote down what I'd found. I let it sit overnight. A good mechanic doesn't cut into something she doesn't understand yet. Not even when her hands are shaking a little. And mine were. Just a little. In a way I didn't examine too closely. I locked the shop. I went inside the house. The house that used to be his might soon be mine, though I didn't let myself think that word yet. I did not sleep well. Around 2 in the morning, I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark shape of the barn, thinking about $400,000 split three ways, and a truck nobody wanted, and how my grandfather had never once, in 83 years, done anything by accident. I thought, too, about the $800 Whitney had already floated for the truck. Strange. How badly a woman about to receive a third of $400,000 needed $800. Enough to call about it twice in 1 week. Numbers like that don't add up by accident either. Earl taught me that. When the math doesn't sit right, you don't argue with the customer. You go find the leak yourself. Morning came gray and flat. The kind of Indiana sky that doesn't commit to rain or sun, either one. I made coffee I didn't drink. I went out to the barn before I'd even decided to. The Ford sat where I'd left her, hood cold, that seam still waiting under my flashlight like it had all night to think about what it was going to tell me. I crouched down on the creeper. I rolled under. This time I brought a wire brush, and 30 minutes I didn't have because I had a transmission rebuild waiting at the shop. A man named Curtis Vance had already called twice. The weld ran 12 inches along the inside of the frame rail, boxed in on three sides, like somebody had built a shelf, and closed the front of it. Not a repair, a container. My grandfather had welded a steel box to the underside of his own truck, then driven it around town for who knows how long, hauling feed, firewood, me to school in the mornings, with something sealed inside the frame the whole time. I sat under there a long minute, dust in my hair. I thought about every conversation I'd ever had with Earl Hollis about that truck, how he wouldn't let anyone else touch it, how the one time Whitney's ex-boyfriend, a mechanic himself, offered to change the oil for free. Earl said, "No thank you, son. I do my own," in a voice that ended the conversation. How he'd bought a box of a specific grade of stainless bolts from the hardware store in town. I remember because I was the one who drove him. He wouldn't tell me what for. Just a project, he'd said. He was 79 that year. 400 bolts, easy over the years. Little projects, always the truck. Never the tractor, never the house. Always the truck he told everyone was worthless. My phone rang while I was still under there. I hit my head on the frame getting out, which is its own kind of poetry. It was my Aunt Carol, Whitney's mother's sister, calling to ask so sweetly whether I'd want to sell my little truck to Whitney. She was sentimental about family things, apparently. It would mean so much to her to keep something of Grandpa's. She offered $800, Carol said. Which is generous, Dana, considering. Considering what? I asked, already knowing. Considering the condition, Carol said. You know how those old trucks get. I told her I'd think about it. I did not think about it. I hung up. I sat on the tailgate of my own truck, actual truck, the one I drive for work. I did some arithmetic instead. $800 from a woman who was, according to the family group chat, about to receive $133,000. Her third of the $400,000. $800 to make the truck and whatever question mark it represented go away quietly. That told me more than the weld had. I called Raymond Settle instead of calling Carol back. Mr. Settle, I said, when Grandpa updated the truck's title into a trust a few years back, did he ever come in and change anything else? Anything small? Anything you might not have thought worth mentioning at the reading? There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause a careful man makes when he's deciding how much of the truth is his to give away yet. Dana, he said finally, I can tell you Earl came to see me 11 times in the last 4 years, more than most clients come in a lifetime. I can't discuss the content of privileged conversations that occurred outside the reading, but I can tell you this. Earl was not a man who did anything 11 times by accident. He told me the same thing, basically. I said, different words. Take your time getting under that truck, Dana, Settle said again. This time I understood he wasn't being poetic. He was telling me something he was legally not allowed to say straight out. I went back to the shop that day. I finished Curtis Vance's transmission because bills don't wait for revelations. While my hands did the work, my head did something else entirely. I thought about the box under the frame. I thought about my grandfather's hands, thick and scarred, patient hands, the kind that could set a nut by feel in the dark. I thought about the 11 visits to Raymond Settle's office. I thought about $800. Curtis paid me $410 for the job, parts and labor both, cash, the way he always did, folded twice in his shirt pocket, handed over like it embarrassed him a little to make me ask. I didn't ask. He just knew the number. He paid it plain, no haggling, no talk of family discounts. The way you'd expect any honest transaction to run. The way almost nothing in my own family had run in 6 weeks. Whitney called that night. I let it go to voicemail twice. Out of curiosity, mostly, about what she'd say when she thought I wasn't answering. I picked up on the third. Dana. Hi. So, I heard from Mom you're being kind of weird about the truck thing. I'm not being weird. I said I'd think about it. It's just, I really think Grandpa would have wanted me to have something that meant something, you know? Not just the money. The money's, obviously the money's important. We all have plans. But I want a piece of him too. Her voice did the thing it always did when she was performing sincerity. A little breathy, a little too careful. 800 is fair, probably more than fair. What plans? I asked. Not confrontational, just a mechanic checking a reading against the manual. What? You said we all have plans. For the money. What's yours? A beat too long. The studio's expanding, she said. I'm putting a down payment on a bigger space downtown. It's a great opportunity, actually. The landlord's giving me first right of refusal because I already work with half his other tenants. I said that sounded exciting. I did not say I'd been to Indianapolis 3 months earlier to pick up a part for a customer's truck. I did not say I'd walked past Whitney's studio. The front window had a for lease sign taped to the inside of the glass. The lights inside were off at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I filed that too. My whole life had become filing things. So, the truck, she said. 800, cash, I can Venmo you right now. I'll think about it, I said again. I meant it exactly as much as the first time. She hung up without saying goodbye, which told me the performance was over because the audience had stopped clapping. I didn't sleep that night either. Around midnight, I got up. I made a second pot of coffee I also wouldn't finish. I went back out to the barn with a notepad, an actual paper notepad, because some things you don't want sitting in a cloud somewhere. I wrote down every strange thing about the last 6 weeks. Earl's 11 visits to settle, the bolts he wouldn't explain. Once, out of nowhere, at Sunday dinner 2 years back, he'd told me something. If anything ever happened to him, I should keep his truck running, no matter what anybody said about it. My mother had laughed, back then. Actually laughed. She'd said, "Dad, nobody's fighting you for the truck." Nobody was fighting for the truck. That was the whole design of it. You don't guard something by making it look valuable. You guard it by making it look worthless. Worthless enough that nobody thinks to check. I thought about my grandfather lying awake some night, 81 or 82 years old, working out exactly how to protect something from people he loved but didn't trust. Choosing the one object in his life so plain, so obviously junk, that greed would walk right past it every single time. It made my chest hurt in a way I hadn't let myself feel yet. Not grief, exactly. Something more like being seen. He'd built this for me specifically. He'd built it knowing Whitney would laugh at it in front of a room full of people. He'd built it anyway, because the laugh was the whole camouflage. I didn't open the box that night. It would make a better story if I had. Torch in hand, dramatic reveal at midnight. But Earl taught me better than that. You don't rush a diagnosis. You gather everything you can first, because once you cut something open, you can't uncut it. And if I was wrong about what I thought I'd find, I wanted to be wrong slowly, carefully, with witnesses, not alone in a cold barn at 1 in the morning, making a mistake I couldn't take back. So I did the responsible thing. I called Raymond Settle first thing the next morning. I asked him to meet me at the barn. I asked him to bring somebody from Farm Credit if he could. A thought had started forming that had nothing to do with the box. It had everything to do with where $400,000 actually comes from. When a man dies with a farm, and no savings account anybody's ever seen. "Why Farm Credit?" Settle asked. "Because Grandpa's farm has a mortgage he never talked about," I said. "And I want to know how big it is before anybody spends money that might not exist yet." The line went quiet again. That same careful quiet. "I'll make some calls," Settle said. "Dana, I want you to know, whatever's under that truck, Earl asked me 11 times to make sure it went to the right person. He used those exact words, the right person, not the oldest, not the neediest, the right one." I hung up. I sat with that for a long time. The phone warm in my hand the way the fob had been warm 3 weeks earlier. Both of them carrying the last touch of a man who'd spent his final years building me a door, so quiet nobody else would ever hear it open. It took me a while to fall asleep that night. When I finally did, I dreamed about a weld, clean and even, holding under a weight nobody else could see. Raymond Settle came out to the farm on a Thursday. With him was a woman named Lena Boyd from Farm Credit. A loan officer with reading glasses pushed up into short gray hair. A leather folder she carried like it weighed more than it looked. I'd cleared the shop of customers for the afternoon. Cost me $210 and a canceled brake job. Even then, I remember thinking I was keeping a ledger without meaning to. Everything had a number attached now. Everything was evidence of something. "Show me," Settle said. I got the creeper and the trouble light. I slid under the Ford myself. I wasn't about to let anyone else be the one to open it. Up close, in better light, I could see what I'd only felt with my thumb 3 nights before. The box was maybe 14 inches long, 6 wide, welded flush to the inside of the frame rail. A seam so clean it looked like it belonged there. like the truck had been built with it in 1978, not modified sometime in the last 4 years. There was no lid you could see from outside. You had to know where to press. He told me once, I said. My voice did something strange in the enclosed space under the truck. The good stuff rides underneath. I thought he meant the engine. I found the seam's weak point exactly where a man who'd taught me everything about metal would have hidden it. A section where the weld ran shallow instead of deep, meant to be broken by someone who knew what she was looking at, not by someone who didn't. I used a cold chisel, gentle, more coaxing than force. The panel came away in one piece, hinged on one edge. Earl had built it to open like a door, not shatter like a secret. Inside, wrapped in a plastic freezer bag gone slightly cloudy with age, sat a manila envelope. A smaller sealed envelope with my name on it. In handwriting I would have known anywhere. Underneath both, flat and heavy, a stack of documents bound with a rubber band. It had gone brittle enough to snap when Settle tried to slide it off. I didn't open my envelope first. I want that on the record, too. I handed the whole bundle up to Settle. I wanted a witness who wasn't me, someone whose word would count for something later. You look first, I said. Tell me what it is before I let myself feel anything about it. Settle read in silence for almost 2 full minutes. Lena Boyd and I stood in the cold, our breath showing. I watched a lawyer's face do something I hadn't seen it do at the actual will reading. It changed. Dana, he said finally, this is a second will. Notarized 3 weeks after the one we read at the office. It's witnessed. It's dated. And it revokes the first will entirely. The whole world got very quiet and very loud at the same time. The way it does when a diagnosis comes back different than you expected. It leaves the farm, the house, and all real property to you, Settle said. Specifically to you, Dana Marie Hollis, by full legal name. And there's a provision here about the $400,000 distributed under the first will. He looked up. Dana, do you know what a home equity line of credit is? I did. I'm not stupid about money, even if my family's always acted like grease under my nails meant grease between my ears. It's a loan against a property you already own. Correct? Lena Boyd said, stepping in for the first time. Opening her own folder. I pulled the farm credit records this morning at Mr. Settle's request. Earl took out a line of credit against this farm 4 years ago, $410,000 drawn down in stages over 3 years. She turned the folder around so I could see the numbers myself. Black and white. A signature at the bottom that was Earl's, shaky in the way it had gotten near the end, but unmistakably his. The last withdrawal was 11 months before he passed. So the 400,000, I said slowly, working it the way I'd work a bad diagnostic code. The 400,000 everybody's already spending. That's not an inheritance sitting in an account somewhere. That's borrowed money, Boyd said, secured against this farm, which, according to the second will in your hands, now belongs entirely to you. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of my own barn, right there next to the Ford's front tire. My legs had a private opinion about all this, one that didn't involve staying upright. They already told everyone, I said. Whitney posted about a downtown studio. My aunts are planning trips. Brett's been talking about a truck of his own, a new one, not one he'd have to crawl under. They spent money that legally doesn't belong to them yet, Settle said. Distributed under a will that this document, if it holds up, and I have every reason to believe it will, entirely revokes. I looked at the small envelope with my name on it, still unopened, sitting in my lap like it was waiting for permission. Read it when you're ready, Settle said gently. There's no hurry now. The hurry's over. It already happened. 4 years ago. One signature at a time. None of us knew it was happening. I opened it there in the barn. Settle and Boyd stood over me, not because they needed to see it, because I think they both understood something. Grief gets dressed up as paperwork sometimes. Nobody should read a letter like that completely alone. Earl's handwriting filled 2 pages, front and back. The careful block print of a man who left school at 16 to work, but never once let anyone tell him that made his words worth less. Dana, if you're reading this, you found it, which means you're exactly who I always knew you were, the one who checks under things instead of just looking at the paint job. I want you to know I love your sister. I love Carol and the cousins too, but love and trust aren't the same tool, and I only had one of them left by the end for most of this family. You changed my oil filter without being asked. You knew my truck's knock better than my own doctor knew my heart. You never once asked me for anything. That is exactly why I'm giving you everything. I took a loan against this farm because I needed the money to look real. Real to people who only understand real money, so that when I told them the truck was worthless, they'd believe me. And they'd leave you alone with it. I put the actual inheritance where nobody who never got under a hood in their life would ever think to look. The farm is yours. The house is yours. What's left of the loan is a debt now, not a gift. Whoever spent against it before the second will surfaces is going to have to answer for that themselves. I didn't do that to punish them. I did it because I'm 83 years old, and I got tired of watching them treat you like the help. The good stuff rides underneath, Dana. I always saw you. They only ever saw a truck. I love you. Go get some supper. Don't let it get cold like you always used to tell me. Grandpa, I read it twice. I did not cry. Not there. Not with Boyd and Settle watching. But something in my chest came loose. It had been screwed down tight since I was 9 years old, sitting in a different hard chair, being told my parents weren't coming home. I don't get loud, I said quietly, mostly to myself, mostly to the letter. I get it in writing. Settle almost smiled. Earl would have liked that. My phone buzzed on the workbench behind me. Whitney, texting into the family group chat. A screenshot of a real estate contract with her signature already on it. $112,000 down payment on the downtown space. Captioned with 3 champagne emojis. Thank you, Grandpa, for believing in me. I looked at the message a long time, then I looked at the second will in my hands. Dated 3 weeks after the one everyone believed was the only one, notarized, witnessed, real. When do you file this? I asked Settle. As soon as you're ready, he said. It's your document now. But Dana, once I file it, everything they've already spent against that first will's distribution becomes their problem, not the estate's. Some of them may be facing real financial exposure. I want you to understand that before you decide. I thought about $800 for a truck worth more than the whole estate they were fighting over. I thought about a for-lease sign in a dark studio window in Indianapolis. I thought about the good stuff riding underneath, and how long I'd have to wait to let it surface the way my grandfather clearly wanted it to. Not yet, I said. Let them finish spending it first. I want to explain why I waited. I know how it sounds. Sitting on a document that could stop my sister from making the biggest mistake of her financial life. It sounds cold. Maybe it was. But Earl didn't build a hidden compartment and write a 2-page letter because he wanted a quick fix. He built something that needed time to work. Exactly the way it was designed to work. I'd spent my whole life learning from him. You don't rush a repair just because the customer's impatient. You let the diagnosis run its full course. You let the problem show you everything it is before you touch it. So for 3 weeks, I did the strangest thing I've ever done in my life. I lived a normal one. I went to the shop every day. I finished Curtis Vance's transmission. It purred like new. He tipped me $60 I didn't ask for. I did an alignment on a farm truck that pulled harder left than mine had. Oil changes. A brake job on a minivan belonging to a woman named Patty Greer. She told me every single visit about her grandchildren, whether I asked or not. I kept my hands busy, idle hands, around a secret that size. Start doing math they shouldn't be doing yet. And I watched my family spend money that wasn't theirs, one purchase at a time. On a shared calendar of humiliation I never asked to have a front row seat to. Whitney signed the lease on the downtown studio, $112,000 down, financing the rest against her expected inheritance, according to a text she sent Carol. Carol, bless her inability to keep anything to herself, forwarded it straight to me. By accident, or maybe not by accident. I've never been sure with Carol. Brett bought a truck, a real one, chrome and leather. $61,000 on a loan he told everyone he'd pay off the second probate closed. He drove it to the farm to show me. Actually drove it out to Pickett Road specifically. Parked it next to my grandfather's green Ford. I watched him do it. I understood, really understood for the first time, that some people need an audience for their cruelty, even when they think they're just being friendly. See the difference, he said, grinning, patting the hood of his new truck like it was a horse he'd won at auction. No offense, Dana. Yours is a nice little project or whatever, but this is a real truck. It's a nice truck, I said. I meant it. I also meant something else entirely, something he had no idea he was standing directly on top of. My mother, who split her time between disapproving of me and forgetting I existed, called twice that week, both times to ask, gently, whether I'd reconsidered Whitney's offer for the Ford. $800, she reminded me, was generous. I told her I'd think about it. The same 3 words I'd been saying for weeks now. I began to understand why my grandfather had loved this particular kind of patience so much. It cost the other person nothing to hear. It gave away nothing in return. And it bought me all the time in the world. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was watching Whitney at Sunday dinner, 3 weeks into the wait, holding court about her new studio, describing paint colors and clientele, a business plan she'd clearly researched exactly as much as she researched anything, enough to sound good out loud for 4 minutes at a family table. I just feel like Grandpa would be so proud, she said. She reached for the mashed potatoes. I watched her say it with her whole chest, no flicker of doubt anywhere on her face. I thought about the letter folded in my coat pocket, where I'd carried it every day since I read it. I thought, you have no idea what he actually thought of you, and it isn't what you think. What was the 11 visits about? I asked, out of nowhere, watching her face for anything. What? 11 visits? Grandpa went to see his lawyer 11 times in the last 4 years. I was just curious if you knew why. Something crossed Whitney's face, there and gone so fast I might have imagined it. If I hadn't spent my whole career reading small signals in machines that don't want to tell you the truth? I don't know, she said. Updating paperwork, probably. Old people do that. Probably, I agreed. I passed her the gravy. Inside, I was doing exactly what my grandfather's letter had described me doing my whole life. Checking under things, listening with my palm flat against the metal for the sound that doesn't belong. I did tell one person the truth during those 3 weeks. It wasn't a lawyer or a loan officer. It was Curtis Vance, the transmission customer. He'd become something closer to a friend over the 11 years he'd brought his trucks to me. A quiet man in his 60s who ran a small trucking outfit out of Hancock County. More than once, he'd told me I was wasted on a family that couldn't tell a torque wrench from a table leg. You look like a woman carrying something heavier than a transmission, he said. The day he picked up his truck, standing in my bay with his cap in his hands, the way men of a certain age still do around women they respect. I told him all of it: the weld, the box, the letter, the second will, the loan against the farm that the whole family was already spending like it was cash in a shoebox. Curtis listened the way he always listened, without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet a long moment. "Your grandfather built you a door," he said finally, and made sure nobody else in that family even knew there was a wall there. "I don't know when to open it." "You'll know," Curtis said. "You've never once misdiagnosed an engine in 11 years. I've been bringing you my trucks. You're not going to misdiagnose this." I held on to that more than I expected to. It's a strange thing, being told you're good at something you've never had the words for. Patience as a skill instead of a personality flaw. Silence as a strategy instead of a weakness. My whole family had spent my whole life treating my quiet as proof I didn't have much to say. Curtis was the first person outside that barn who understood it was actually where all my strength lived. The re-hook, if I can call it that, came 11 days after I opened the box. On a Tuesday afternoon, Raymond Settle called me at the shop with something in his voice I hadn't heard from him before. Urgency, dressed up as calm, the same way I dress up my own nerves at a diagnosis I don't like. "Dana," he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not do anything rash when you hear it. Whitney came to see me this morning. She wants to contest the distribution timeline. She's asking questions about whether there's a more recent will." My stomach dropped through the floor of the shop. "Does she know?" "She doesn't know what you have," Settle said. "But she's not stupid, Dana, whatever else she is. She noticed you asked about the 11 visits at dinner. She's starting to worry there's something she hasn't accounted for. She asked me directly whether Earl updated anything after the will we read." A pause. I told her truthfully that as her lawyer I couldn't discuss that, but that as a matter of general practice, families should always assume an estate could contain documents not yet discovered. That's not privileged information. That's just good advice I give every client's family. You scared her. I told her the truth in a way that would make her nervous, Settle said. For the first time, I heard something like satisfaction in his voice. "Dana, I've watched that family treat you like furniture for 6 years of representing your grandfather. I'm not sorry." I hung up. I stood in my empty shop a long moment, the Ford still parked in the second bay where I'd left her. That panel Earl built, now closed back up the way it had been. Everything inside it moved to a fireproof box in my bedroom closet, except the letter, which never left my coat pocket. Whitney was starting to feel the weight of something she couldn't name yet. The engine was starting to knock in a rhythm even she could hear now, even if she didn't know yet what was wrong. I thought about the timeline. The studio lease was signed. Brett's truck was financed. The money was flowing out of an account that, legally, in a matter of weeks, was never going to belong to any of them. Somewhere in that thought, I found the date. Not a plan yet, just a shape. The family had scheduled a probate update meeting for the following month, all beneficiaries invited, to finalize the distribution timeline now that the initial paperwork had cleared. Whitney had organized it herself, wanting, in her words, to make sure everyone got their piece as smoothly as possible. I called Raymond Settle back. "That meeting next month," I said. "I want to be there. And I want you to bring the second will." 2 weeks into the wait, Carol invited the whole family to Sunday dinner at her place. It had become the new tradition since Earl's death, everyone rotating houses now that the farm sat quiet and unused for gatherings. I almost didn't go. I'd been avoiding family dinners the way you avoid a diagnostic you already suspect you know the answer to. Not because you're afraid of being wrong, Because you're not ready to say the words out loud yet. I went anyway. Earl would have gone. Some part of me wanted to see it up close. How far the spending had gotten. While nobody but me, a lawyer, and a loan officer knew the ground had already shifted. Carol's dining room smelled like pot roast, and the particular dust of a house that only gets its good china out 4 times a year. Whitney arrived with a bottle of wine that cost more than most of the meals I'd eaten that whole month. She set it down like a small announcement, the way she'd always done things. Generosity performed loud enough for everyone to notice. I found the perfect countertops for the studio, she said, passing around her phone with photos of quartz samples. Marble look, but way more durable. The contractor says he can start the second the lease closes. How much are the countertops? I asked, not looking up from my plate. I felt the table's attention shift toward me, the way it always did whenever I said more than 3 words in a row. I don't know, 6,000? Maybe 7 with installation. Why? Just curious what $112,000 of down payment leaves room for, I said. I kept my voice light, conversational. The exact tone Earl used to use when he was asking a customer a question he already knew the uncomfortable answer to. Seems like there's a lot left over for extras. There's plenty left over, Whitney said, a little sharper now. The whole point of an inheritance is you don't have to pinch every penny like you're used to, Dana. Like you're used to. I let that sit in the room a second, the way you let a bad engine noise sit a second, before you decide whether it's serious or just a loose heat shield rattling. I've never had to pinch pennies, I said. I've always just paid for things I could actually afford. Brett laughed. Not unkindly. More like a man defusing a room out of habit. All right, all right. Can we not do the thing where dinner turns into a lecture about fiscal responsibility? I'm not lecturing, I said. I'm asking questions. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one. I watched my mother's eyes flick toward me at that, something in her face registering the phrase. Or maybe just the tone, some echo of Earl's voice coming out of my mouth that she couldn't quite place yet. But it unsettled her all the same. Speaking of questions, Carol said, trying in her way to smooth things over, did anyone ever find out what those 11 lawyer visits were about? Dana brought it up a few weeks ago, and I've been curious ever since. Probably just updating beneficiary forms, Whitney said. Too quickly. The way people answer when they've already asked themselves the same question at 2 in the morning and didn't like where the thinking led. Old people do that. Grandpa was paranoid about paperwork near the end. He wasn't paranoid, I said. He was thorough. There's a difference, too. What is with you and differences tonight? Whitney snapped. And there it was. The first real crack in the performance. Small, almost invisible. But I'd spent my whole life reading small signals in things that didn't want to give up the truth easily. You've been weird for weeks, ever since the reading. Is there something you're not telling us, Dana? The whole table went quiet. I felt every eye on me. My mother's, Carol's, Brett's. I understood in that moment that I was standing at the exact edge of a decision I'd already made without fully admitting it to myself. I could end this right here, at Carol's dinner table, over pot roast and a bottle of wine Whitney couldn't really afford. I could save everyone 6 more weeks of spending money that didn't exist. I found something interesting when I was cleaning out the truck, I said instead. Carefully, giving away exactly as much as I'd decided to give. No more. I'm still figuring out what it means. When I know for sure, you'll all know. Found what? Whitney pressed. When I know for sure, I said again. I picked my fork back up. I let the silence do the rest of the work. I'd learned by then that silence, held long enough and calm enough, says more than any accusation ever could. Nobody pushed further that night, though I caught my mother watching me twice more across the table with an expression I couldn't quite name, somewhere between suspicion and a dawning, uncomfortable respect. Whitney talked less for the rest of the meal, her countertop enthusiasm noticeably dimmed. Twice I caught her checking her phone under the table, doing exactly the kind of math I'd hoped that dinner would push her toward. I drove home that night, thinking about the shape of what I'd just done. Said nothing and everything at once. The same trick Earl had used his whole life. For the first time, I really understood something. Why Raymond Settle called his careful hints to Whitney good advice, not a betrayal of confidence. You can tell someone the truth without handing them the whole document. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is give a person just enough rope, enough to notice on their own how close to the edge they're already standing. The month between that phone call and the meeting was the longest month of my life. And I've lived through some long ones. I'd buried both parents by the time I was 10. I'd buried the only grandfather I ever had 6 weeks before this whole thing started. I know what a long month feels like from the inside, the way time gets thick and slow around grief. This was a different kind of long. This was waiting the way you wait for a diagnosis you already suspect. When you're not afraid of being wrong, you're afraid of being right. I kept working. That's the thing nobody tells you about carrying a secret that big. Life doesn't stop and let you carry it properly. Curtis Vance brought in another truck, a fuel pump this time, $90 in parts and 2 hours of labor. I charged him half price. He'd sat in my bay once and told me I wasn't wasted on anybody. Some kindnesses you pay back even when the person insists they don't need it. Patty Greer brought her minivan back for an oil change she didn't need yet. Mostly, I think, to talk to somebody. I let her talk about her grandchildren for 40 minutes while I worked. Earl taught me that too. A shop is sometimes a confession booth for people who don't have anywhere else quiet to sit. 10 days into the wait, Raymond Settle called with something that changed the shape of everything. He'd been going through Earl's file one more time, cross-checking dates for the probate filing. He'd found a second item tucked behind the loan paperwork Lena Boyd had pulled, a beneficiary designation on a small life insurance policy. Nobody in the family had ever mentioned it. $22,000. Updated the same week as the second will. It's payable to Marcus Ihanako, Settle said. Do you know that name? I didn't. Not at first. It took me 2 days of quiet asking around town before I understood. Marcus was the son of a man named Samuel Ihanako. He'd worked the farm alongside Earl for almost 20 years, before a stroke forced him to stop. Earl had kept him on payroll 2 full years past the point he could still do the work. Samuel's widow told me why over coffee in her kitchen. Your grandfather said a man's dignity doesn't retire just because his hands quit working. Samuel had passed the year before Earl did. His son Marcus was 19, working 2 jobs to help his mother keep their house, studying diesel mechanics at the community college in his spare hours. The same program, it turned out, that had trained Curtis Vance's newest driver. Earl had never told a soul in our family about this. He'd quietly kept paying into a policy for a farmhand's son. None of them had ever bothered to learn his name. It wasn't part of the second will. It wasn't tied to the truck or the farm. It had nothing to do with anything Whitney and Brett had already spent against. It was just Earl, one more time, taking care of somebody the rest of the world had stopped noticing. So quiet, it would have stayed buried forever. If Settle hadn't happened to catch the paperwork behind the loan file. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up the phone. It reframed something in me I hadn't fully named yet. This whole plan wasn't only about protecting me from my family. It was about a man who'd spent his last years quietly redistributing whatever dignity he could get his hands on to the people who'd actually earned it and never asked for it. Me included. Marcus included. Probably others I'd never even hear about. The truck and the farm were the loudest part of the plan, built to detonate in a room full of people who needed a lesson. The insurance policy was the quiet part. It asked for no audience at all. Somehow that made it the part that told me the most about who my grandfather really was. Underneath 83 years of playing a plain, unremarkable farmer, for a family that never once thought to look closer. Whitney called 3 more times that month, each call a little more transparent than the last, the performance thinning out the way a bad paint job shows the rust underneath it, faster than a good one. The first call, she offered $1,000 for the truck. The second call, $1,200. This time she didn't bother pretending it was sentimental. Look, Dana, I need this to be simple. Just take the money. Why does it need to be simple? I asked. A long pause. Because I have a closing date, she said finally, for the studio. And some things are tied to, look, it doesn't matter. $1,200 for a truck that doesn't even run right. That's more than fair. That's generous. I told her the truck ran fine. I told her I'd think about it. I did not tell her what I now understood with total clarity. Her studio's financing was somehow tangled up with an expectation, clean, uncomplicated inheritance money, landing in her account on a specific date. Every day I didn't sell her the truck was a day that expectations sat exposed to a risk she hadn't priced in. The third call, the week before the meeting, she cried. I want to say that honestly. It would be easy to tell this story like she was a cartoon villain the whole way through. She wasn't. She was scared. And some of it was real. I don't know what's going on, she said, but something is, isn't it? Mom's being weird. Mr. Settle's being weird. You're being weird. Everybody's being so weird, Dana. And I have $112,000 down on a lease, and if something happens to the timeline, I don't know what I do. For 1 second, one honest second, I almost told her. I almost said it all. There's a second will. There's a letter from Grandpa in my coat pocket. I've read it so many times the folds are going soft. The $400,000 was never sitting in an account. It was a loan against a farm that's legally mine now. Please stop spending money you don't have. I almost said all of it. Some tired, worn-down part of me still wanted to protect my sister. From a fall I could see coming from a mile away. The way you want to grab someone's arm even when they've told you to let go. But I thought about $800. I thought about the scrapyard comment, the worthless pile of junk, the smile in the hallway, already spending money that wasn't hers, the way not one person in that room at the reading had told her to stop laughing at me. I thought about Earl's letter, the exact words. Whoever spent against it before the second will surfaces will have to answer for that themselves. I didn't do that to punish them. I did it because I got tired of watching them treat you like the help. I hope the closing goes well, I said instead, which was true, in a narrow sense. I did hope, somewhere in me, that it would all work out, even though I knew, with the same certainty I know a bad bearing by sound alone, that it wasn't going to. She hung up without saying goodbye again. I was getting used to that particular silence. 2 days before the meeting, Curtis Vance stopped by the shop unannounced. No truck this time, just him, standing in my bay in his cap, an envelope in his hand. I did some thinking, he said, about what you told me. I run a business, Dana. I know what it looks like when somebody's spent against money that isn't confirmed yet. I've had drivers do it, contractors do it. It never ends well for the person who spent it, and it usually ends worse the longer it takes to come out. He held out the envelope. This isn't charity. This is a referral fee. I sent 3 customers your way this year because you're the best mechanic in this county. Everybody in the trucking business around here knows it now. I should have paid you for that a while ago. Inside was $300. I hadn't earned it by wrench work exactly. I'd earned it by every honest hour I'd ever put into his trucks, and every honest word he'd ever said about me to somebody else. I didn't cry in front of him. I did later. Alone, in the truck, Earl's truck, sitting in the driver's seat with the engine off and the letter in my lap. It was the first time in 6 weeks somebody outside a lawyer's office or a loan officer's folder had looked at me and seen exactly what I was worth, without needing a document to prove it. Thank you, I told him. Don't thank me, Curtis said. Just remember, when this is all over, that somebody besides your family saw you clearly the whole time. I've thought about that sentence more than almost anything else from those weeks. It's easy when your own blood spends a lifetime looking past you to start believing the problem is you, that you're actually as invisible as they treat you. Curtis Vance, Raymond Settle, a farm credit officer named Lena Boyd. None of them related to me by anything but circumstance. They saw me clearly in about the time it takes to read a document. My own mother needed a second will and a lawyer's careful hints, just to start suspecting there was more to me than a truck she thought was worth $800. The night before the meeting, I laid everything out on my kitchen table. The letter, the second will, a certified copy Settle had prepared, the original safely in his office safe, the farm credit statement showing the $410,000 draw against the farm. A printout Lena Boyd had helped me compile, quietly, of the specific withdrawal dates, matched against the specific things my family had already spent. $112,000 for Whitney's lease, $61,000 for Brett's truck, smaller amounts here and there for my aunts, a Caribbean cruise deposit, a kitchen renovation, a paid-off credit card, $209,000, roughly, already spent or committed, against an inheritance that, come tomorrow, would legally cease to exist in the form they believed it existed in. I don't get loud, I thought, looking at all of it laid out under my kitchen light. I get it in writing. Settle called one last time that night, mostly to check on me, I think, though he framed it as logistics. Are you ready? He asked. I think Grandpa's been ready for 4 years, I said. I'm just the one who finally gets to open the door. For what it's worth, Settle said, in 31 years of practicing estate law in this county, I have never seen a man build a plan this careful, this patient, this quiet. He didn't want revenge, Dana. I want you to understand that going into tomorrow, he wanted protection. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one from where you're standing. I thought about that, the whole drive out to the farm that night. The Ford's headlights caught the same gravel drive I'd walked 1,000 times as a kid. The barn sat dark against a sky finely clear of clouds, stars out sharp and cold, the way they only get in late fall in Indiana. Protection, not revenge. I turned the phrase over, like a part I wasn't sure was bad yet, checking it from every angle. By the time I pulled into the drive, I'd decided he was right. Mostly. Though I also decided protection and consequence aren't always different animals. Sometimes protecting one person means letting the truth land, fully, on the people who never once checked what was riding underneath. 3 days before the meeting, something happened that I haven't mentioned yet. I've been trying to tell this in order. The way Earl taught me to trace a wiring harness, one connection at a time, never skipping ahead to where you think the short is before you've actually traced the wire. Whitney showed up at my shop unannounced. No truck this time. Driving a rental car. Hers, I'd learn later, had been repossessed 2 days earlier. over a payment she'd let slide while she waited on inheritance money that hadn't materialized on the timeline she'd promised the finance company. "I need to talk to you," she said, standing in my bay in heels that weren't built for a concrete floor. For the first time in longer than I could remember, she looked genuinely afraid, instead of performing something adjacent to it. I set down the wrench I was holding. A 9/16. I remember that detail with a clarity I don't have for a lot of that week. I told her I was listening. "Mom said you've been asking about Grandpa's lawyer visits," she said. "And Brett said you asked him at dinner about the 11 times. Dana, is there something you're not telling us? Because I have people asking me questions about my financing, and I don't have good answers, and I need to know if there's a problem before Thursday." I thought, in that moment, about every version of honesty available to me. I could have told her everything right there, saved her the public reckoning 3 days away. Some worn-out sisterly instinct in me still wanted to protect her, even after everything. I could have lied outright, told her there was nothing, bought myself 3 more days of peace, at the cost of watching her walk into that meeting even more unprepared than she already was. I chose something in between, which is, I've come to understand, usually the most honest choice available. When you don't yet have the full authority to say what you know. "I found something under Grandpa's truck," I said. "I'm not going to tell you what, not before Thursday. But Whitney, if I were you, I'd stop spending money you don't have in your account yet. That's not a threat. That's the only advice I can give you right now." "Under the truck," she repeated. I watched her mind go somewhere it clearly hadn't been before, tracing back through every strange thing Earl had ever said about that Ford. Every time he'd refused to let anyone else touch it. Every dollar of stainless bolts he'd bought without explanation. "Dana, what does that mean?" "It means what I said. Stop spending money you don't have yet." "I can't stop," she said. Her voice cracked on it. The first real crack I'd heard in 6 weeks of performance. "I already signed. I already put the deposit down. If I pull out now, I lose everything I've already paid. And if I don't pull out and the money doesn't come through the way everyone said it would, I lose everything anyway. Either way, I lose, Dana. And I don't even know why." This was the hardest moment of the whole 6 weeks. Harder than reading the letter. Harder than the meeting itself. Watching my sister realize it in real time. Standing in my shop, in shoes that weren't meant for concrete. The ground she'd built her whole plan on had already shifted, days earlier. And I was the only person who knew by how much. "I can't fix this for you," I told her. Which was true. "But I can tell you it'll be easier if you stop making it worse between now and Thursday." She left without saying anything else. I stood in that bay a long time after her rental car pulled out of the lot, holding a 9/16 wrench I'd forgotten I was still holding, thinking about how strange it is. The people closest to us so often only start seeing us clearly at the exact moment they realize they need something from us, something they can no longer take for granted. I called Raymond Settle that night. I told him about the visit. "You didn't tell her anything specific," he said. "Not quite a question. No, I told her to stop spending money. That's not privileged information. That's just common sense. Same as what you told her about assuming an estate might have undiscovered documents." Settle was quiet a moment. "You're more like your grandfather than I think even you realize, Dana. He never told people the whole truth before they needed it either. He just gave them enough rope to notice they were standing near an edge." I thought about that phrase for a long time that night. Enough rope to notice they were standing near an edge. I thought about how different that was from cruelty. Though I understood why, from where Whitney was standing, it might not have felt different at all. Earl hadn't warned anyone outright. Not even me directly. Not until I'd already found the box on my own. He'd built a structure where the truth revealed itself to whoever was patient and careful enough to look for it, and let everyone else discover, in their own time and at their own pace, exactly how much they'd been building on borrowed ground. The 2 days before the meeting passed slower than the whole month before them combined. I went through the documents one more time with Settle in his office, made sure every figure was correct, every date verified, every signature authenticated beyond any question a desperate person might try to raise. Lena Boyd walked me through exactly how she'd explain the loan reclassification if anyone at the table pushed back. In plain language, no jargon. The kind of clarity that leaves no room for a cornered person to twist the facts into something more forgiving of themselves. I didn't sleep well those 2 nights either. But it was a different kind of sleeplessness than the first night after I'd found the weld. That first night had been the sleeplessness of not knowing. This was the sleeplessness of knowing exactly what was coming and having to sit with it anyway. The particular exhaustion of watching a slow-motion collision you have full power to stop, and choosing, deliberately, carefully, for reasons you believe are right, to let it happen anyway. On the morning of the meeting, I drove out to the barn before heading to Settle's office, not for any practical reason, just to sit for a minute in the green Ford with the engine off. My hands on the wheel the way they'd been the day I first drove her home. I thought about Earl underneath this truck 400 times. Boots sticking out, trouble light hooked over the leaf spring, telling a girl who thought she knew everything about engines that the good stuff rides underneath. I hope I'm doing this the way you wanted, I said out loud, to an empty barn, to a dead man's truck, the same way I'd talked to it the night I first found the weld. The truck didn't answer, obviously, but something about sitting there, hands on a wheel he'd held 1,000 times, steadied something in my chest, something that had been shaking, quietly, underneath all my careful preparation, since the moment Whitney had stood in my shop in the wrong shoes and asked me what I wasn't telling her. I drove to Settle's office with the folder on the passenger seat. Thin, unremarkable. Everything that mattered in the world sitting inside it. I did not once, the whole drive, think about what I was about to do as revenge. I thought about it the way Earl would have thought about it, as a repair finally being completed, a diagnosis finally being read out loud. To a room full of people who'd spent 6 weeks driving on a bearing they didn't know was already failing. The meeting was held in the same conference room at Raymond Settle's office, where the first reading had happened. Whitney had chosen it herself, I think. She wanted the symmetry, closing things out where they'd opened. Everybody gathered around the same table to finalize what she believed was already hers. I got there early, before anyone else. I sat in the same hard chair I'd sat in 6 weeks earlier, holding 2 keys and a warm leather fob and no idea what I was actually holding. This time I sat with a folder of my own. Thin, unremarkable, the kind of folder nobody looks at twice, until somebody opens it. They arrived in a cluster, the way they always did. My mother first, then Carol and the other aunts, then Brett, driving his new $61,000 truck. I heard it idling in the parking lot before I saw him walk in. Whitney came last, 10 minutes late. The way she always managed to make her lateness look like a grand entrance instead of a discourtesy. Wearing a blazer I didn't recognize, new, probably purchased with money she also didn't technically have yet. "So," she said, settling into her chair, glancing at her phone. "I know everyone's excited. The closing on my studio is in 11 days, so hopefully we can just confirm everything's on track and get everyone their checks moving." "Everyone's checks," my Aunt Carol echoed, nodding like a woman who'd already spent hers in her head 12 times over. Raymond Settle sat at the head of the table, the way he had 6 weeks before. This time he had two folders in front of him instead of one. He looked at me first, a small question in his eyes. I nodded once, the way you nod to a doctor before a procedure starts. Ready. Before we finalize any distribution timeline, Settle said, there's a matter I need to bring to the family's attention. 6 weeks ago, following the reading of Earl Hollis's will, Dana discovered a sealed compartment, welded into the frame of the truck bequeathed to her. He let that sit a moment. I watched every face at that table do a version of the same thing. Confusion first, then a kind of dawning unease. It moved around the room like a draft under a door. Inside that compartment, she found a second will, executed and notarized 3 weeks after the will we read at this table, along with a personal letter addressed to her, and documentation of a home equity line of credit taken against the farm. What? Whitney said. It's the moment I'd waited 6 weeks for, and it happened exactly like this. Her face didn't go pale right away. It went blank first. The specific blankness of a person doing very fast math they don't like the answer to. I don't understand, my mother said. A second will? Earl never mentioned a second will. He wasn't required to mention it to anyone but his attorney, Settle said. He was very deliberate about who he told and when. Dana, would you like to explain what you found? Or would you prefer I read the relevant provisions? Read it, I said. My voice came out steady. I don't get loud. I get it in writing. Settle opened the folder. He read the second will's key provision aloud, the same clause he'd read to me alone in a barn a month earlier. It revoked the first will entirely. It left the farm, the house, and all real property to Dana Marie Hollis, by full legal name. Dated and witnessed 3 weeks after the version everyone at that table believed was final. The room did not erupt. That's not how it happens in real life. Not with people like my family, who've spent generations mistaking politeness for decency. What happened instead was a silence so complete I could hear the radiator ticking, the exact same tick it had ticked at the first reading. I understood in that silence that Earl had built this moment as carefully as he'd built the box under his truck. He hadn't wanted a shouting match. He'd wanted a room full of people forced to sit with a document they couldn't argue with. The way you can't argue with a bad bearing once you've heard it fail. That's not, Whitney started, then stopped, then started again. That doesn't override the first will. The first will already cleared probate. There's already distribution documents signed. The second will predates the closing of probate by 3 weeks, Settle said. It supersedes the first entirely. Under Indiana law, a validly executed later will revokes a prior one automatically. This one revokes the prior distribution in whole. The probate court will need to be notified immediately. Any distributions already made or committed will need to be addressed. Addressed how? Brett asked. I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not the easy confidence of a man who'd never once had to check under anything in his life. That would depend on what's already been spent, Settle said. He looked briefly at Lena Boyd. She'd come with me. She sat quietly at the far end of the table, her own folder closed in front of her, waiting. Lena, I said, can you explain the loan? She opened her folder. 4 years ago, Earl Hollis took out a home equity line of credit against this property. $410,000, drawn in 3 stages over 3 years. The final withdrawal came 11 months before his death. That money was not sitting in a bank account waiting for probate to release it. It was borrowed against the farm, and the farm, under the second will now in effect, belongs to Dana. So the 400,000, my mother said slowly. I watched her get there before Whitney did. 40 years of quietly resenting her own father's decisions, curdling into something new on her face. The 400,000 we thought was in an account somewhere was a loan against a piece of property that is no longer part of the distributable estate, Settle said, which means that money was never available to distribute in the first place. Any of it already spent is a personal liability to whoever spent it, not a claim against the estate. Enjoy your worthless pile of junk, I said quietly, mostly to myself, though the whole table heard it. That's what you told me 6 weeks ago, in this same room. I've thought about that sentence almost every day since. Whitney's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I'm not saying it to win an argument, I said. I'm saying it because I think it's the truest thing anyone said in this office all year. It was worthless to you, because you never once looked underneath it. Grandpa built the whole plan around that exact habit. He knew none of you would ever check. Whitney stood up so fast her chair scraped hard against the floor. This is insane. This is Dana, did you do this? Did you forge something? The signature's been authenticated, Settle said before I could answer. Your grandfather's attorney, myself, witnessed the second will's execution personally, along with a notary whose license is a matter of public record. I would be very careful about the word forge in this room, Whitney. It's not one I'd want attached to my name right now, given the circumstances. I didn't feel triumphant in that moment, standing there with the room gone silent around me. Mostly, I felt tired. The specific tiredness of finally setting down something heavy. You've carried it so long your body forgot it was heavy, until the weight left your hands. I have $112,000 down on a lease, Whitney said. Her voice had gone thin and high, the voice of a woman watching a structure she'd built on sand, realizing in real time the tide was already in. I have a closing in 11 days. Dana, you have to understand, I can't. If that money isn't there, I don't have it. I spent it because everyone told me it was coming. I told you $800 was fair for the truck, I said quietly. You told me the rest of you would figure out the real money. Nobody said anything to that. Carol looked at her lap, the way she'd looked at her lap 6 weeks earlier, when Whitney called the truck a worthless pile of junk, and nobody in the room had told her to stop. Brett, I said, because I wasn't done yet, how much did you finance on the new truck? 61,000, he said. Quiet now. None of the chrome and leather bravado from the day he'd parked it next to Earl's Ford to show me the difference between a real truck and a nice little project. Against a third of an inheritance that no longer exists in the form you thought it did, I said. I'm not telling you that to be cruel. I'm telling you because Grandpa's letter said whoever spent against it before this surfaced would have to answer for it themselves. I think you should hear that from me. Once. Clearly. Instead of finding out from a collections call in 3 months. My mother spoke then, for the first time really speaking to me instead of about me, in a voice I hadn't heard her use since I was a child. Dana. Did he say anything about me? In the letter. I hadn't planned for that question. It caught something in my chest I thought I'd already sealed shut. He said he loved you, I told her. Which was true, because it was in the letter. One line, easy to miss among everything else. He said love and trust aren't the same tool. By the end, he only had one of them left for most of this family. She put her hand over her mouth. I watched 40-some years of a complicated relationship compress into that one gesture. For a moment, I felt something for her that wasn't anger. Something closer to the exhausted sympathy you feel for anyone who spent a lifetime not noticing what was right in front of them, until it was too late to fix it. What happens now? Carol asked, very small. Now, Settle said, I file the second will with the probate court this week. The first distribution is formally revoked. Ms. Boyd's office will need to be notified so the loan can be properly reclassified, belonging to the estate under Dana's inheritance, not a distributable asset. Whitney, Brett, anyone who's already spent or committed funds against the original distribution will need to work out repayment arrangements individually, likely with their own lenders and landlords, since that money was never legally theirs to spend in the first place. Whitney was still standing, one hand braced on the table. I watched the exact moment the anger in her face finally gave way to something rawer and more honest. "He hated me," she said. "This whole time. He hated me and he never said anything." "He didn't hate you," I said. "I meant it." I'd read the letter enough times to know the difference between hatred and heartbreak. He got tired. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one from where you're standing. I heard Raymond Settle's voice in my own mouth as I said it. I understood in that moment that some things get passed down whether you ask for them or not. Patience, precision, the particular kind of dignity that doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard clearly across a room. I didn't smile. Not there. Not with my sister standing over a table with her whole future rearranging itself in real time. That's not the kind of person Earl raised me to be. It's not the kind of victory this was. But later, alone in the truck, in the driver's seat, engine running, heat finally coming through the vents, I let myself feel it, quietly, the way you feel a good weld hold under pressure for the first time. No fanfare, just the simple relief of something built right, finally doing exactly what it was built to do. The weeks after the meeting moved faster than the weeks before it, the way a diagnosis, once confirmed, tends to move faster than the waiting ever did. Settle filed the second will with the Hancock County Probate Court on a Tuesday. By that Friday, the court had issued a hold on all distributions under the original will, pending review. I remember the exact date because it was the same day Curtis Vance brought in a customer's truck with a blown head gasket. I did the whole job with my phone sitting on the workbench, checking for updates between torque specs, the ordinary and the enormous stacked right on top of each other, the way they always seem to be in real life. Whitney's studio closing fell apart within 2 weeks. I heard about it secondhand, from Carol. She called me not to gloat, exactly. Carol had never learned how to sit with bad news without sharing it with someone. I happened to be the someone she still had on speaking terms. "The landlord pulled out," Carol said. "Something about the financing not being verifiable anymore. Whitney's devastated, Dana. She put down $112,000 she doesn't have, and the landlord's lawyer is saying that money might not even be refundable." I told Carol I was sorry to hear it. Some part of that was true. The part of me that remembered Whitney at 9 years old, teaching me to ride a bike in that same gravel driveway, before the money and the resentment and the golden child years had calcified between us, into something neither of us knew how to soften anymore. Brett's situation resolved a little differently, mostly because Brett, for all his showing off, wasn't stupid about money the way Whitney was. He went to the dealership himself, before anyone told him to. He traded the $61,000 truck back for something he could actually afford, took a loss on the trade, avoided the kind of default that follows a person around for 7 years. He called me, actually called me, a few weeks later. Not to apologize exactly. Brett's never been a man built for apologies, but to say something close to it. "I shouldn't have parked that truck next to yours," he said. "That was a jerk move. I'm sorry." "It's okay," I told him. I meant it more than I expected to, and I think he heard that too. The aunts settled their smaller commitments quietly. A canceled cruise deposit here, a credit card payment plan there. Nothing dramatic. just the slow, unglamorous math of people learning something. Money spoken about at a dinner table isn't the same as money sitting in an account. My mother didn't call for almost a month after the meeting. When she finally did, it wasn't about money at all. "I want to see the letter," she said. "If you're willing to show me. I don't need to keep it. I just want to see his handwriting one more time." I drove out to her place that weekend. I sat with her at her kitchen table while she read it. Twice. Slowly. The same table where I remembered, as a kid, being told my parents' accident had been quick, that they hadn't suffered, a kindness I'm not sure was entirely true, but one I'd needed to believe at the time. My mother cried reading Earl's letter, quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't ask anyone to comfort it. When she finished, she folded it back along its original creases, with more care than I'd ever seen her handle anything. "He was right," she said, "about all of it. I did treat you like the help. I don't know when that started. I think somewhere along the way I decided grief was a competition. You'd already won it by surviving yours. So I stopped feeling like I owed you anything extra." She pushed the letter back across the table to me. "I'm sorry, Dana. I don't expect that to fix 6 years of it. I just wanted to say it out loud. Once, in this kitchen, since I never said it in that conference room, I told her thank you. I meant it. I also told her something. An apology doesn't rebuild trust by itself. Trust is more like a good weld than a good speech. It has to be built slow, layer by layer, tested under load before you believe it'll hold." She said she understood. I think, for the first time in a long while, she actually did. The probate court finalized the second will's authority 6 weeks after the meeting, uncontested in the end. There was nothing left to contest once the documentation was laid out plainly. The notary's records, the witnesses, the loan statements, all of it lining up the way a good diagnosis lines up. Once you stop guessing and start measuring, the farm, the house, and the truck were mine. Formally, on paper, in a way that no longer depended on anyone's permission or goodwill. Lena Boyd came by the shop one more time, not for business, just to drop off a final copy of the loan's reclassification for my records, now categorized correctly against the estate, not a phantom asset 3 relatives had already spent against. "I've done this job 17 years, she told me, leaning against my workbench while I finished a brake job. "I've seen a lot of estates come through my office in bad shape. Families tearing each other apart over things that don't matter. I don't think I've ever seen one man build a plan this deliberate. To protect one person specifically, he must have really known you. He raised me," I said. "From 9 years old. He knew exactly who I was. He knew who you'd become," she said. "Those aren't always the same thing. Most people who raise a kid are guessing. He wasn't guessing. He built this whole thing around a very specific bet, that you'd be the one person in this family who'd actually check under the truck, instead of just believing what everyone told you it was worth." I thought about that a long time after she left. Earl hadn't just protected me from Whitney and Brett, from a family that never valued my quiet the way it should have. He'd bet his entire final years on it. 11 visits to a lawyer's office, a loan against his own farm, hundreds of stainless bolts bought in secret, all on the specific belief that the granddaughter who checked weld seams for a living would eventually check the one that mattered most. He hadn't needed to hope I'd find it. He'd built it to be found, by exactly the kind of person I already was. The insurance policy for young Marcus Iannaco went through Settle's office without a hitch that same month. $22,000, exactly as Earl had arranged it years before anyone in my family even knew the boy's name. I didn't push for that part to be public. Some kindnesses don't need an audience to still count. I only found out myself because Settle mentioned it once, in passing, like a man handing over one more small brick from a much bigger wall Earl had built without telling anyone the blueprint. I reopened the shop's second bay to full-time work that fall, hired a part-time hand, a young guy named Marcus, fresh out of a trade program. He reminded me, more than I expected, of myself at that age. Quiet, careful, underestimated by people who mistook his stillness for having nothing to say. I put him on oil changes first, the way Earl had put me on oil changes first. I watched him learn to listen to an engine with his whole body, not just his ears, the way I'd learned it, the way it apparently gets handed down, if you're patient enough to teach it. Whitney and I didn't speak for almost 4 months. When she finally called, it was a short conversation, awkward in the specific way that only family awkwardness manages to be. Equal parts unresolved anger and unwilling love. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," she said first, before I could even say hello properly, which told me she'd rehearsed it. "I just wanted you to know I found a smaller space. Cheaper. I'm doing it right this time. Actually paying for it with money I have. Instead of money I was told was coming." "That's good, Whitney," I said. I meant it. The way you mean it when you want someone to succeed even after they've hurt you. Some part of loving your family never fully turns off, no matter how hard they make you want it to. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I know $800 for a truck that turned out to be worth an entire farm is. I don't even have words for how that sounds now. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Actually, sorry. Not performance sorry. I know the difference now. I didn't used to. I told her I appreciated that. I told her the door wasn't closed. Not all the way, but it would take longer than one phone call to open it back up the way it used to be. When we were kids riding bikes in that same gravel driveway, before either of us understood what money and favoritism could do, to two sisters who used to actually like each other." The county recorder's office finalized the deed transfer that winter. Earl Hollis's farm, all 160 acres of it, the house, the barn, and the green Ford, recorded formally under my name at the Hancock County Courthouse, the same building where I'd sat in a hard chair 6 months earlier, holding two keys, no idea what I was actually holding. I drove there myself to pick up the certified copy. The clerk behind the counter, a woman named Diana Strander, had known Earl for 30 years, selling him permits, filing his tax paperwork every spring. She looked at the document a long moment before sliding it across to me. "Your grandfather used to bring me a jar of his tomato preserves every August," she said. "Told me one time, the good stuff always takes longer to can write. I never understood what he meant by it until I heard what you found under that truck." I told her I wasn't sure I fully understood it either. Not all the way. Not yet. She smiled like a woman who'd spent 30 years watching families come through her office at their best and worst. She'd learned, somewhere along the way, that understanding usually arrives slower than the paperwork does. The farm credit line was formally reclassified the same month, folded into the estate's assets under Lena Boyd's careful reworking. No longer a phantom $400,000 floating between three relatives' expectations. A real debt against a real property that I now owned outright. I intended to pay it down the plain, unglamorous way, one season's harvest at a time. The way Earl had paid down every debt he'd ever carried in his life. Whitney's landlord did eventually return $60,000 of her $112,000 deposit, after months of her own lawyer's letters, enough to cover most of what she'd need to start smaller and cleaner the second time around. She never got all of it back. I think, in a strange way, losing part of it mattered more to her rebuilding than getting all of it back would have. Though I know better than to say that to her directly. Some lessons a person has to arrive at in their own kitchen, at their own hour, with nobody standing over them explaining the moral. I think about Earl's 11 visits to Raymond Settle's office more than almost anything else from that whole year. 11 separate mornings. An 80-year-old man drove himself into town, sat in a hard chair much like the one I'd later sit in, worked out, piece by piece, exactly how to protect one granddaughter's dignity from a family that had stopped seeing her years before he did anything about it. 11 visits, 4 years of quiet, patient bolts, one letter, folded twice, waiting under a truck nobody wanted, for exactly as long as it took the right person to finally check what was riding underneath. Curtis Vance still brings his trucks to my bay, more of them now than when we started. Word spreads around Hancock County the way it does in a place small enough that everyone's business eventually becomes everyone's business. He never brings up that year directly. Out of respect, I think. But every so often, handing me the keys to some new fleet truck, he'll say something like, "Good stuff usually rides quiet, Dana." The way a man passes along a phrase he picked up secondhand and liked well enough to keep using. I never tell him it isn't originally his. Some sayings are better shared than owned. My mother and I talk most weeks now. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary maintenance of a relationship finally being tended instead of ignored. The way you'd tend an engine you'd let idle too long, out of neglect rather than malice. She asked me once, carefully, whether I thought Earl had done the right thing, building all of it in secret, instead of simply telling the family the truth while he was still alive to referee it himself. I think he tried honesty first, I told her. For about 70 years. I think by the end he'd learned something. Some people only believe a thing once it's already happened in front of them, in writing, with a lawyer in the room. I thought about the letter, the bolts, the 11 visits, the whole quiet architecture of a plan built by a man who'd run out of easier options. I think he did the only thing that was left that would actually work. She nodded, slow, thoughtful, like a woman finally letting a hard diagnosis settle instead of arguing with it. She didn't ask me again. Marcus, my hire, not Earl's, turned 20 this spring. He passed his certification exam on the first try. I gave him a raise I couldn't entirely afford yet, paid it anyway. That's a debt of a different kind, the kind that compounds forward instead of backward. I'd rather owe a little on that than ever again owe nothing to somebody who deserved more. He asked me once why I kept 2 bays running, instead of expanding into a bigger shop downtown, the way half my customers kept suggesting. Because the good stuff doesn't need a bigger building, I told him. It just needs somebody willing to check under it. He didn't fully get the joke, being 20, not having lived through the year that made it one. But he laughed anyway, the way you laugh at your boss's odd sayings whether or not you understand them yet. He went back to the alignment rack. I went back to my own bay. The shop hummed along the way it always does. Ordinary, busy, entirely, finally, mine. Brett still drives out on weekends sometimes. No truck to show off anymore. Just himself. He's taken, oddly, to helping me split firewood behind the barn. Work he never once offered to do when Earl was alive to ask him for it. I don't read too much into it. People change at whatever pace they change, usually slower than you'd like, faster than you expect. I've learned not to grade anyone's arithmetic but my own. Carol sends a card every year on the anniversary of the reading, not the funeral, the reading. I think that says more about how she experienced that whole year than any conversation we've had since. This year's card just said thinking of you and Grandpa, in her looping handwriting. No explanation needed between us anymore for what that meant. I kept it tucked in the frame next to his letter. 2 handwritings. One still living. One long gone. both finally saying something plainly and completely true. Diane Ostrander retired from the recorder's office the following spring, 31 years at that same counter. The whole county turned out for a small reception in the courthouse lobby, folding tables, sheet cake, a banner somebody had made by hand. I went. I brought her a jar of tomato preserves, my own, first batch I'd ever canned. I followed a recipe card I found tucked behind Earl's kitchen spice rack in his own handwriting. They came out a little too sweet. She ate a spoonful right there at the table, told me they needed another year of practice, same as everything worth doing right. I laughed. It sounded exactly like something he would have said. I found Marcus Ihanacho about 2 months after the meeting. The young man Earl had quietly written into that insurance policy, the one nobody in my family ever knew existed. He was working a shift at a tire shop out on Route 40. 19 years old, forearms already strong from work that ages a body faster than it ages a face. I introduced myself. He went still. The way people go still when a stranger says a dead man's name they didn't expect to hear again. Your grandfather kept my dad on the payroll 2 years after his stroke, Marcus said, before I'd even finished explaining who I was. Everybody told him he should have let my dad go. He never did. He used to say a man's dignity doesn't retire just because his hands quit working. He said something almost exactly like that to me once, I told him, about a truck instead of a man. I think it was the same sentence underneath. I told him about the policy, $22,000, his buy right, already in motion through Settle's office. He cried right there behind the counter of a tire shop on a Tuesday afternoon. No shame in it at all. Watching him, I understood something. Earl's plan had never been only about me. It had been about redistributing whatever dignity a hard, quiet, unglamorous life had earned him the standing to redistribute. To a granddaughter who checked welds for a living, and a farmhand's son who was studying to do the same kind of work his father had done for 20 years, without ever once being thanked for it properly. I offered Marcus a job that same week, part-time at first, alongside Marcus, my other hire. Yes, it's a strange coincidence. 2 Marcuses in my shop inside of a year. No, I've never quite gotten over how much Earl would have laughed at that. I put him on oil changes first, same as I do everyone. By spring, he was diagnosing electrical faults by ear almost as fast as I was, which either means I'm a decent teacher, or it means some things run in a kind of family that has nothing to do with blood. Whitney's smaller studio opened that spring. Modest, self-financed, nothing like the downtown space she'd imagined a year earlier. She invited me to the opening, tentatively, by text. The kind of invitation you send when you expect to be turned down and want to leave room for that gracefully. I went. I stood in a small, honest, well-lit room full of her actual work. Good work. Better than I think either of us had given her credit for. Over the years, we'd spent measuring each other against a family that had never taught either of us how to be measured kindly. I used the $800 I would have paid you for the truck, she said, half joking, gesturing at a shelf of hand-thrown pottery on a kiln instead. Figured it was the least insulting way to spend that number ever again. I laughed. Actually laughed. The first real laugh I'd shared with my sister in longer than either of us could probably name. Grandpa would have liked that better than the truck money anyway. Do you think he'd have liked any of this? She asked, quieter now. Meaning all of it. The will, the reversal, the year we'd both spent rebuilding ourselves. Out of the wreckage of a family dinner table, one that used to know how to be kind, and forgot somewhere along the way. I think he built the whole thing hoping we'd end up exactly here, I said. Not because he wanted you punished, because he wanted you to finally have to build something with your own hands. instead of somebody else's money. I think that was always the actual inheritance. Not the farm, not the truck, just that. Brett paid off his smaller truck within the year. Steady and unremarkable, the way most honest repayment is. My mother started coming to the farm on Sundays again, the way she used to before all of this, sitting in Earl's old kitchen with a coffee she never finishes. Once, just once, she asked if she could sit in the driver's seat of the green Ford, just for a minute. I let her. I watched her put both hands on the wheel the exact way I do, the exact way Earl used to. Some habits apparently pass down whether anyone teaches them on purpose or not. I kept the farm running, not as a monument, though I understand why it might look that way from the outside. A granddaughter preserving her grandfather's land out of grief dressed up as duty. It was simpler than that. I liked the work. I liked Sundays with dirt under my nails instead of grease, tending the same fields Earl had tended for 60 years. Some evenings the light goes long and gold across the stubble, the way it always does in late fall. I drive the green Ford out to the far fence line, just to sit in it a while, engine idling, that diesel knock settling into the same rhythm it always has, steady as a heartbeat that never learned how to hurry. I had the barn's frame rail repaired properly that first winter, the compartment welded shut for good this time. Not because there was anything left to hide, because some things, once they've done their job, deserve to be closed with the same care they were opened with. I kept Earl's letter in a small frame in the kitchen instead of my coat pocket, close enough to read on the hard mornings, worn soft now at the folds from a year of handling. People ask me sometimes, mostly customers who've heard some version of the story around the county by now, whether I ever regret waiting those 6 weeks before telling my family what I'd found. I don't. Earl didn't build a fast fix. He built something meant to hold weight the way a good weld holds weight. Slow, patient, tested before it's trusted. If I'd rushed it, told Whitney everything that day in her wrong shoes, I think it would have felt like a warning, instead of what it actually was. A truth finally strong enough to carry the family that had spent so long refusing to carry me. The truck still runs. I check the frame every spring, out of habit more than necessity now. My thumb along that old seam, smooth and closed and quiet, exactly the way Earl left it, before he ever thought to put anything inside it at all. Some nights I still hear him. Not really, I know that. But in the way you hear a person you loved long enough that their voice becomes part of how your own mind talks to itself. The good stuff rides underneath, Dana. You only ever look at what's shiny. I sat there a moment longer, hands on the wheel, the shop lights off behind me, the fields gone dark blue at the edges, the way they do just before real night sets in. Somewhere out past the fence line, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I turned the key slowly, one more time. The engine caught on the first try.